Okay, so I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to ask you to do two things. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is raise a hand if the answer is yes. These are not embarrassing questions. If you're at home, I don't know if you're going to really do it or not, but please participate. The second thing I'm going to do is ask you to be honest. You are in church after all. So I'm going to ask you some very simple questions, and I just want you to raise your hand if the answer is yes. If the answer is no, sit there and wait for the answer to be yes, because I bet it will be. So, first question. How many of you have ever thought you knew how something was going to go before it even happened? Raise your hand. Okay. I think we have some liars in the room. Okay, now, a little different. How many of you thought that it was going to go really, really badly, and it did go really badly? Cool. All right, now how many of you thought it was going to go really well, and it went really well? Okay, now how many of you have been totally wrong about that? Like you thought, oh, this is going to go great, and it went horribly. Or you thought, this is going to be the best day ever, and you wound up going home just, wah, 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 you know. Okay, so I'm seeing a common theme here. And you might be wondering where I'm going with this. It's because of this next question, and I want you to answer this one too. How many of you, when that happened, said, I knew it all along? I just knew it. Come on, be honest. I've said it. That's a fun thing to say when you get to say it, and it's a horrible thing to hear when you're on the receiving end of it. Anyway, what I'm talking about here is something that we all know, which is just we all have expectations. But I did a little research on this because I'm like that, and there's actually a name for this in the world of psychology. I know psychobabble, but it's called hindsight bias. And what it is basically we all go into situations knowing certain things about those situations. And based on what we think we know, we make a judgment, and then we wait and see what happens. When our expectations are confirmed, we go, aha, see? I knew it. I've always known it. I had knowledge of it. I just somehow magically was able to predict the future because I know everything about the situation. And it confirms things for us, and it builds a strong relationship there between our expectations, that situation, and the outcome. It starts to build a pattern in our thought life. It starts to build a pattern of thinking. However, when we are wrong, when we go in and we have this expectation, and we go through this situation, whatever's happening, and then the opposite happens, we completely ignore it. Completely ignore it. Like, we may remember it, but it doesn't do anything to our thinking. We aren't like, maybe I should change the way I think. We never do that. We just say, I was wrong. But when we're right, we are so right. Like, we are crazy right, y'all. And it's because of how smart we are. Anyway, it's called hindsight bias. A few more things to know about this is that this only works with primarily, well, it doesn't work only with, but it primarily works with negative experiences in life. You can go and you can look, and you've probably seen memes online where it's like it takes 3 positive things that you say to someone to cover 1 negative thing you say to somebody. Well, depending on who you go to and who you talk to, it's 3 to 5 or something like that. But if we expect something positive and we get something positive, we just go, oh, I'm so lucky. But when we expect something negative and something negative does happen, we say, I knew it. My expectations were right, my thoughts were right, my beliefs were right, everything was right. I knew it all along. I told you so. And you start to get these patterns built in your ways of thinking, in the way that you interact with people in your day-to-day life, whether it be, just at the grocery store, you expect people to be a little rude with their shopping carts, or maybe you're driving down the road and you see a guy in a big truck go by, and maybe you've been cut off by people in a big truck a couple of times, and it causes you to think, oh, that guy in that big truck is going to cut me off. And then it happens, you're like, aha, see? Well, you had no way of knowing that person was going to do that, but these patterns start to build because we're pattern building things. That's what we do. That's why when we look at stars, we see familiar shapes, and when we look at paint on the wall, we're like, oh, that's my grandma. We see faces in it. It's just true. It's what our brains do. We recognize patterns. We build patterns, and then we live largely from the experiences in those patterns. And so that is kind of just how we do. It's a normal human reaction to the world. That's just the way we are. But it's not necessarily a good thing. It can lead to some very, very dangerous beliefs. Like this one. People are terrible. Yesterday, I decided to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning because my girlfriend went to Ireland for her job, and I'm just like, I need to get a new job. So she went to Ireland, and so I went to the airport to see her off, and after that I went to Barnes & Noble several hours later to work on my sermon, and so I was kind of already in a grumpy mood. I was kind of already just a little about life in general. And so I decided I was going to work on my sermon. I was going to take my computer, and I had my sunglasses on. And I go in, and I had to go to the bathroom, and so I went up to the bathroom with my computer and my glasses, and I took my glasses off, and I set them down, and I finished, and I left, and I forgot my glasses. But I didn't think about that. I didn't even remember my glasses until 30, 45 minutes later or something like that. And so I'm standing up to leave, and I go to myself, I start looking around for my glasses, and then like, oh God, they're upstairs. I left them in the restroom. And so I said to myself, they're gone. They're totally gone. There's no person on this planet who walks into a restroom, sees a nice pair, and these were nice sunglasses. They're the nicest sunglasses I've ever owned, and the most successful pair. Normally, sunglasses last about a week for me, and then I break them or lose them, or someone's child breaks them, or something like that. So, yeah, I've had that happen. Drew. Anyway. So I go back into the bathroom, and I'm so convinced that my sunglasses would be gone. And so I go back into the bathroom, and I'm like, looking around, like, and I go right to where I left them, and they're gone. And I just said to myself, people are terrible. All of them, everybody. Opportunistic, selfish, blah. This made me so mad. I was sitting there texting, just, somebody stole my glasses. The world is horrible, But that doesn't always happen. And so I went downstairs to the kiosk, the little customer service, and I was thinking, maybe a kind soul said, these are nice sunglasses. I'm going to give them back to their owner. And I waited about 15 minutes, and a nice gentleman walked up to me with a pair of sunglasses that were not my sunglasses and said, are these them? I said, no, thank you, but I appreciate the effort. And I was totally right. I knew it all along, right? No one would walk into a bathroom and see a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses sitting there, a nice pair, very fashionable Ray-Ban sunglasses, and say, I'm going to take these and return them to their owner. No, that's not the way people are, because people are terrible, right? And so I had negative experiences and negative expectations reinforcing each other in my brain, and it put me in a really, really bad mood for about 3 hours. I was just not pleasant to be around. I'm at home sitting on my couch watching TV, just like, I want to get on Facebook and just rant, And if you don't have this one, maybe you have this one. You always do this. Same person, same topic, same reaction. You always do this. This is just who you are, right? That's a fun one to say when you get into those fun little conversations that aren't so fun with the people you love the most. Or all relationships end badly. Maybe you've been burned by relationships. Maybe divorce has touched your life. Maybe death has touched your life. Infidelity or something like that. Maybe it's touched your life and you had a sneaking suspicion that it was going to. And suddenly now you just can't help but believe there is no other way. That's just the way things are. And maybe not this one, maybe this one. I'll never break this bad habit. Oh man, I've been smoking cigarettes for 15 years. Or I have one too many on occasion, and that's really, really bad. So, I got to stop this. And if not this one, certainly this one. I'll never, this sin will always be in my life. What about that one? That one's very common. Everyone's just like, yeah. Because again, we have this opinion, we have this idea in our head that we are this way. And our expectation helps shape our behavior. And because our expectation is negative, our behavior becomes negative, and what happens? Then the outcome becomes negative, and then we say, see, that idea I had the whole time was right. And then it just goes around and around and around and around and around. Helps make these things called self-fulfilling prophecies. You expect things to go badly, what do? They go really badly, right? But again, this is all very normal. This is what human brains do. This is nothing new. This is nothing special. Actually, we've known about this forever. Psychologists came around and just put a name on it and then built a little model, because that's what they do, because they look at the brain and say, what's going on there? So they came up with this thing called hindsight bias. And basically what it is the human tendency to sit there and believe that when we are by chance correct about something, that means we know something. And because we know something, we're going to keep knowing that. And that builds a little circle in our brain. Well, today, I want to change that. Because like I said, this doesn't really work with positive experiences that much. Again, you apply for a promotion at work and you get that promotion. You don't say, I knew it all along. You say, oh, good, lucky me. But you don't get that promotion, you say, my boss is a jerk. I've always known my boss is a jerk. God, and that's the way it goes. And so these negative experiences are the things that really hit us hard when it comes to hindsight bias, when it comes to shaping our outlook in the world, when it comes to our experiences and who we are and how we interact with each other and how we interact with those in our lives. It really is the negatives that impact us the most, which is why I call this one Dawning Realizations, seeing God's work in the negative side of life. I have one more question for you before we move on, and then one more at the very end as well. But a little more survey. How many of you have ever looked back on something way, way, way after the fact and said to yourself, I saw God actually doing something there. That actually happened for a reason. Bunch of hands. Pretty normal thing. That's because of this, our guiding verse. And this is the problem with our natural inclination when it comes to how we think. Because we say, my knowledge, my expectation, my experience, my behavior, and we go in these big circles, but we completely forget that God is wrapped right up in the middle of all that. So here, Paul, writing to the Romans, he says, we know in all things God works for the good of those who love him. And we've heard this verse hundreds and hundreds of times. We have it on internet memes. We have it on posters in our homes. Some of us have tattoos of this, I'm sure. It's possible. Why not? I mean, I once knew a guy who had an entire book of the Bible tattooed on his arm. It was pretty cool, actually. But in this verse, we have a different kind of knowledge. We have our natural inclinations, the flesh, as we call it. This is how we operate. This is how we process. This is how we interact. This is how we live. And those negative experiences have reinforced our negative outlooks. But God does things differently. God is actually in those negatives, all things, not just some things, all things. God is in there and he is active. He is working. He is actually engaged with your spirit, with your mind in that situation, trying to bring good out of it. This is one of the hardest things, I think, for me personally. This is one of the hardest things for me to live with right now. Like I said, we can all look back and go, man, I'm really glad I didn't get that promotion because I wasn't ready for it. That must have been God. Or, man, I'm really glad I didn't get that thing that I really wanted because it would have resulted in something terrible. That was God. It is not easy for us to look at right now and say, something bad just happened. Some kind of suffering. Something that I didn't really want to happen. But God is using this experience in my life for good. Maybe it's not a promotion. Maybe it's not, something like that. Maybe it's not, exactly what we want. But again, we don't always know what's best for us, but God does. So, God is at work. We should never forget that. It's our first idea here. So we start with Romans 5, 3 and 4. Not only, and this is talking about glorying and celebrating and stuff, he says, but we also celebrate or glory in our sufferings, which is the exact opposite thing that we ever want to do. Again, when I lost my sunglasses yesterday, I wasn't going, oh man, this is great. I could go get some new sunglasses now. Just what I've always wanted. No. I was like, I want to find this person, and I want to give them a piece of my mind and a piece of my fist. Like, I was at that level of anger, because those were nice. Anyway, moving on. I'm still not over it, in case you haven't noticed. But we should celebrate our suffering according to Paul, the apostle of Christ. He's sitting here saying, look, when things are bad, you better celebrate that. Why? Because we know, not we think, not we hope, not we believe, we know that suffering produces perseverance. And again, this is not the natural way that it works. Bad things happen, what happens? You put up walls, you pull away from people, you isolate, you get angry, you get resentful. That's the normal way that people react when negative things enter our life. And it's only natural. Negative begets negative, right? It's kind of the thought process there. But suffering produces perseverance. No, that's not necessarily the way we think. That's not necessarily what we want to think. It's like, man, I really hope bad stuff happens to me because then I'm going to be really, really capable of persevering. We don't think that. We just don't think that way, right? And perseverance produces character, and we're like, oh, no. Character comes from morality. Well, this is saying that character is actually built by bad stuff that happens to you and going through it. And then character, when you've actually got character, after character has been grown inside you by the Spirit of God who is at work within you, only then we get hope. Which is the exact opposite thing that we want to do. Again, my mind, yesterday I'm driving home, people are terrible, every person is awful. That's not hopeful. That's the opposite of hopeful. That's despair. That's hopelessness. That's saying, I've had negative experience that I knew were going to happen. I thought they were going to happen. Therefore, I'm going to have plenty of other negative experiences just like it because I know stuff, and I know because I know. And it's just a big circle, right? I know because I know. Everyone who is a mother in this room, you have said this to your children because I said so, right? Probably all of you fathers too, because I said so. But again, this is completely counterintuitive, this idea that, okay, we're going to go through bad stuff and it's going to make us better people. No, normally the inclination of people is avoid bad stuff. Surround yourself with good stuff. Go on, hang out with people who are really, really nice to you. And, your life circumstances should be cushy and fun and happy and flowers and daisies and unicorns and stuff. That's what we think of when we think of happiness. You do not think of going through turmoil. You don't think of going through suffering because we know that suffering produces perseverance. The ability to endure this life, to endure, as Shakespeare put it, outrageous fortune, whatever. Excuse me. I did a little acting in high school. So perseverance. And then perseverance builds character. But again, we just don't think that way. We just don't think that way. And we read a little bit further here, and it says, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So just like we saw in the guiding verse, God works in all things. You're a thing. God is working in you, in your suffering, the times that you don't want to be in, which nobody wants to be in those times. God is actually using that time to build something inside of you. And it's called perseverance. And it's called character, which eventually results in hope, which is beautiful. We don't get hope and perseverance and character and all these things from having an easy life. You get it from experiencing the realities of life, the suffering that everybody has to go through, no matter what it is. If it's you lost your sunglasses, okay. That is a negative experience. If it's the death of a child, that's a very negative experience. Being fired from work, that's a negative experience. Those negative experiences affect us in a huge way. And we can choose. We can say, I'm going to do things the way that my natural mind does them. I'm not going to be surprised because life is awful and life is difficult, and I know that things go wrong, and I've always known that, and see, I told you so. And all you do is you reinforce negative, and inside your head, you completely forget that God is in there ministering to you, that God is in there building good things out of terrible things. Or we can choose to walk in faith and in relationship with Christ. We can choose to be this way. We can choose to see that in the suffering, God can make good out of it. Not only can he, but he will make good out of it. It's a promise. We continue on and we look at James. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. It's the same idea. It's the same thing. Different guy, different place, different book. But he's saying the same thing. Suffering, testing of your faith, bad things produce perseverance. And then he goes on to say, let perseverance finish its work. Let it finish. What does that mean? Don't give up. Don't quit. Stick with it. Have faith in the Lord because the Lord is capable and he is active and it will finish its work and you will be mature and complete, lacking nothing. What does that mean? That means you go through it. When you come out the other side, you've got some more character. Not because of you being so strong and tough and stuff, but because God is active in your life, in the people around you, in your workplace, whether or not you work with Christians. God is active everywhere around you, helping you, ministering to you, loving you, trying to make us remember that he's right there. And when we remember that he's right there, that's when he ministers to us, and that's when this perseverance kicks in. And that's when good things come out of bad things. It's not just because we're so strong and so smart. It's because God is at work. God is active in our lives. And then also here in Philippians we see, so then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. We've heard that hundreds and hundreds of times. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. This isn't for us, by the way. God isn't making us strong, charactered individuals who have hope so that we can just benefit. That's part of it. Sure, we do get that. But it's for his pleasure. He wants us to be filled up with who he is. He wants us to experience the positive aspects of life that can only be gained through the suffering. The suffering is going to be there. God's going to be there through the suffering. And through it, God is at work. And then I love those last couple of words. To will, which means, of course, to desire. God is at work inside of you, causing you to desire and to do his goodness. We get to be a conduit. We get to be a tool. But you can't have weak tools. And God knows how to make strong tools. There is a battle going inside. There is a battle going on inside all of us. It takes place right here. It takes place right here. Again, these negative things happen to us. We oftentimes react incredibly negatively. Why? Because I do this thing with my students where I'm an English teacher by day, Cape Crusader by night. But anyway, I do this thing with my students where I go up to the whiteboard and I take a marker and I go boop and I put a little dot on the board and I walk away from the board and I point at a student and say, hey, what do you see? And they go, a dot. I say, okay. What do you see? And they go, it's a dot. And I go, okay, cool. What about the whiteboard? What about me? What about the marker? What about the floor? What about the ceiling? What about the window? What about everything outside the window? What about everything outside of our planet and beyond? And they kind of look at me like, oh, you tricked me. I was like, no, I didn't trick you. I just demonstrated how myopic we are. We look at one thing at a time, and we put all of our focus and all of our attention on that one thing at a time, and we forget about everything else because perspective is tiny. Our perspective is too small. Just like I asked everyone in this room, hey, can you look back in your life and find a time when God, you didn't get what you wanted, but you go, man, I'm really glad for that because God really brought something amazing out of that. And almost everybody in the room was like, yeah, I can. And there's a reason for that. It's much easier to see things when you're far away from them. Like, if you got your nose right here, you only see your hand, right? But oh, look, fingers and all kinds of stuff. Again, I put the dot on the board, and people focus immediately on the dot and on the board. Something bad happens in our life, and we immediately focus on that something bad that happened in our life, and we forget about all the good that surrounds us. We forget about everything else in our lives, and we go crazy over this negative thing. And we say to ourselves again and again and again, I should have seen this coming. I knew this was going to happen. I should have expected this. I did expect this. See how right I was. And all we do is sit there and reinforce negativity. We build castles of negative thought in our brain. And we do it just because it's natural. But that's also how the flesh operates. Because when you're doing that, again, you're completely forgetting about God. It's all about where you put your thoughts. Here, the weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. What do we fight with? On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments. Notice that, arguments. We demolish arguments. What is an argument? An argument is an opinion that someone is trying to put upon you. Well, when something negative happens to you, what is the opinion or the argument that that negative thing is making? Things are always going to be like this. Things are never going to get any better. You should have seen this coming. Condemnation, condemnation, condemnation. Pain, pain, pain. Negativity, negativity, negativity. That's all it is. And every pretense that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, what is that knowledge of God? Remember our guiding voice. Man, our guiding verse. It says, we know that God is active in all things for our good. Like I said, everything in our life rails against that little core truth. We see stuff happen, we go, there's no way that God is working that for good. There's just no way. There's nothing good about that. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I have the opinion, and this is just my opinion, so, take it with a grain of salt. I do have the opinion that sometimes things are entirely bad. Situations are entirely bad. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That's okay. But God can still make something that is entirely bad entirely beautiful. Even if you don't believe it. He is that strong. He is that capable. We have this mindset that we were born with, that we live with, that we grow up with, that tells us bad stuff leads to more bad stuff. And after you get a little experience, you know what to expect. These are very common beliefs that we live with, when in reality, you have no idea what to expect based on previous experience. We say this with the stock market, right? When it comes to our money, we get it. Past performance does not indicate future results, right? We say that. It's like, yeah, okay, Apple did great last decade, but right now, things are a little iffy. Well, why don't we get that for our lives? Because it's not normal for us to think that way. It is a supernatural way to live. It is a supernatural way to think that we are trying to maintain at all times. That's why it's so difficult. Because again, these arguments, they exist. They come, they look smart, they look wise, they look learned. They carry PhDs with them, and they're well-dressed, they have PhDs, and they say, listen, you really got to learn from your experiences. Because your experiences are totally going to teach you stuff that's going to happen in the future. And of course, experience is important. We all know that. There's nothing wrong with wisdom. There's nothing wrong with learning from your past. But we should never expect the past to represent the future. We have no idea what the future is going to be like. And if we believe that God is good and God is at work, we have nothing to expect from the future except that God is going to bring good out of it. So, we take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. What does that mean? That means we control ourselves. when that negative thing happens, we rely on the Spirit of God to give us the self-control. You know the fruits of the Spirit. The last one is self-control. Well, he has enabled us to control ourselves. He has given us the ability to stop and to find God in the moment. He has given us the capacity to stop and to find God here with us in the suffering, in the calamity, in whatever it is. You can find him. Yesterday, like I said, I really wrestled with this sermon. I was sitting there, I had gotten home, I was in an awful mood, I had lost my sunglasses, I was sitting there watching television, just belligerent, just as mad as I can remember being for a while. And I was also trying to work on my sermon passively, and I'm like, no God stuff right now. I was actively I'm sitting here making a sermon about keeping God in your present life, and I was making an active decision, no God right now. I mean, that's how strong our inclinations are. That's how strong the flesh is. Like, we are that predispositioned that way, you know? That's why this is so important. We have to rely on Christ, because it is not that we're so strong and we can endure things. No, it's that God is that strong. And God is that faithful. So I was sitting there, and I was looking at the clock, and I was thinking about my sermon, and I was trying to decide, what am I going to do? Because I was having a really hard time with this whole middle thing. And anyway, I finally, at one point, I took about 10 seconds, and I just stopped. I just sat there, and I reluctantly, and I angrily, and I, without any desire to do so, I forced myself to give it just a little bitty prayer. It wasn't like oh, Father. No, it was just like, what do I do? And immediately, he just said, be honest. Live in the truth. Be honest. Live in the truth. Well, what is the truth? The truth is that God is there with you when you're really ticked off. God is there with you when you are depressed. God is there with you when you are wailing in agony because the worst has happened. And even though sometimes we hate that. We really hate that. We really do. But God is there, and he will bring good out of it. We have to monitor ourselves because God has made that possible for us. Self-control. He has enabled us to look at ourselves and to say, okay, my mind right now, how am I thinking? Am I looking for God in the moment? Am I trying to find the good that God is bringing out of this situation? Or am I just getting really ticked off because I'm angry? And I'm just letting myself get real fleshy because it feels good sometimes to get real fleshy. Anger can feel good. So, where is your mind? Is it on God? Or is it doing this hindsight thing where you're just going around and around and around building, like I said, a castle and a pillar of negativity in the middle of your life? Because, I mean, we think that's not going to affect anything, but, it affects everything. Your relationships, your happiness, your health. Not only that, it's going to bleed out into the relationships that matter the most, and it's going to put them in a bad situation as well. Somebody comes home, they're super negative. All that negativity comes into the home. Guess what? Now everybody else is fighting that same fight of, am I going to be negative, or am I going to focus on God and be positive? What am I going to do? And so what's happening? You're bringing negativity into the home. You're bringing negativity into the workplace. And everybody else is now having to deal with the negativity that you're bringing in because the flesh is that strong, and we are that short-sighted. We can't see past our nose half the time because, we're thinking, what am I going to get for lunch today? And that's fine. That's what we do. But we should maintain the knowledge of the presence of God at all times. That should be the goal. It's a tall order. But with his help, we can do it. And so we move on to Romans 12:2, and it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And again, we already know, if you've been with us here at Church Without Religion, for a while, if you've been with us for a while, you already know that you're new creation, new heart, new spirit, new man, new woman. It's totally new. Your old self is gone, your new self has come. There's not a progression to how much more saved or how much more holy you're going to get, but there is a progression as to how aware of that you are in your day-to-day life. And that's what this is talking about. When this says, don't be conformed to the world, well, what does the world do? The world isolates. The world tears down. The world reinforces negativity. The world allows people to be as fleshy as they want to be, and then that fleshiness just destroys everything. It destroys families. It destroys marriages. It destroys homes. It destroys careers. It destroys individuals, friendships. It will destroy anything it can because that is what the enemy likes to do. I mean, Jesus called him a lion going around trying to seek, to kill, and to destroy. That is what he's trying to do. And I promise you, there is an easy way for him to do that, and it is right there on this page in front, this PowerPoint slide. It's not paper. Conformed to this world. The way that we always think when we're not paying attention to the way that we think. Things are bad. Well, yeah, of course, things are bad. Negative stuff is going to happen because it has happened before. Well, yeah, of course, negative stuff always happens. Where's God? Oh, God's not here. I don't want anything to do with him right now. He let this bad stuff happen, right? All of those thoughts do nothing but poison us and put distance between us and the people we love the most. We can't put any distance between us and God. God doesn't let that happen. But we can just, nope, not talking to you. Shun. We can shun. We can be Amish that way. We can shun God. We can say, God, I'm not talking to you right now. I'm just going to go do whatever I want to because that's what I want to do. And sometimes that's about as developed as our reason is. Sometimes it's just like, nope, not gonna. Like me yesterday, I'm angry that my glasses are gone, and I'm trying to work on a sermon about focusing on God, and what am I doing? Actively not focusing on God, which is the best way to prepare a sermon, guys, let me tell you. So, what do? Look at this. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I'm going to get grammar nerd on you guys for a moment here. That's passive voice. Be transformed. It's not transform yourself. It's not you transform your mind. It's be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, who is renewing our mind? The Spirit who lives within. God is at work in all things to bring good out of the situations in our lives. God is there working to transform our minds. It's a natural process for us. Like I said, the second I sat down and took 3 seconds to say, what do I do? Immediately, I knew what to do, and immediately, everything changed for me. Now, I still had a hard time with the sermon after that, but I was able to work on it and make good progress. And I'm not going to tell you that, it's going to be immediate perfection the second you sit down and make a prayer, but you will notice a difference. I can promise you that, because if God is alive inside of your heart, if you are a Christian, if you have the Spirit dwelling within you, it's impossible for you to pray to God and say, Father, help me, and for him to not help you. That's not possible. Maybe nothing out there changes. Maybe the situation doesn't get better, but the situation isn't what matters. What matters is what's inside of your heart and what's inside of your mind. And if you're sitting there letting the external world dictate how negative or positive you feel, you are not doing this. You are not focusing on the presence of God, because things will be bad, but that doesn't mean we have to sit there and say, oh, well, things are bad because they're bad, and that's all there is to it. And then we get negative and we get awful and we destroy the people in our lives. No. Things are bad. Okay. We rejoice in that. We thank God because we know that when that's happening, just like we read earlier, when things are bad, God is teaching us to persevere. God is developing our character. God is building us up through the worst. That way, we hope. Notice that. That's totally different than what we were talking about earlier. When we just believe negative stuff, we think it's always going to be that way. We have no hope. We just say, oh, that's the way it is, the way it's always going to be. No. When God gets involved, when God shows up, when we remember that he's right there, when we remember that he's present, we hope for a better future. Whatever that is. Maybe it's not, mansions and stuff, but maybe it's happiness. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's healthy relationships and healthy families. Maybe it's just a better understanding of how much God loves you. And that is a perfectly fine thing to gain. God is in the business of forming us into representations of his love. How does he do that? Well, if you look at the love of Christ, it was demonstrated most powerfully in his death. Jesus suffered a little bit before he died, just a little. He was basically beaten to a pulp. We all know the story. I'm not going to go into it. But we know what happened to Christ. And it wasn't flowers and teddy bears and unicorns and rainbows. It was sticks and nails and thorns and people beating the crap out of him. That's what it was. And through his suffering, we see the model for how to respond. What did Jesus say? Forgive them. Forgive these people. And I can't forgive somebody for taking my sunglasses. No damage, no pain. Just my sunglasses are going, yeah. People are terrible. No. Jesus still thought that people were worth dying for. Jesus still thought and still believed and still went through all of it. We can't expect to represent the love of God without having to go through a little suffering of our own. We just have to remember that when we're in that suffering, we're never abandoned and we're never alone. And that's what we want to believe. We want to believe that we're alone for some reason. We have to remember that God's love isn't like our love. God's love isn't like our experiences. God's work is in here. Our futures are not dictated by our pasts because God is at work in our lives. So far I've talked about a lot of negative experiences, but maybe you're one of those people like me who they wrestle with bad habits or sin or something like that, and you just beat yourself up over it. And you just feel so terrible because of it. And you say, I'm never going to beat this. There's just no way for me to beat this. It's part of who I am. No, it's not. It's not part of who you are. It is simply something that you have done in the past. You are not going to always be as you are now. There is a brighter future for your heart and for your spirit. There is a hope of things to come because God does not abandon his children, and God refuses to leave us in that mindset, in that way of living. We simply have to remember where he is, and where he is right here all the time. Let us look back and find God in the struggles. In the struggles. Those things that we don't want to think about. Go find God in that. Bring God into your history, man. Bring God into the things that have happened to you. Look for God in the things that you don't want to think about anymore because of how painful they were. You can learn from that. And always remember to see what God is producing in our lives. God does not want us to stay the way that we were in the flesh. It's very obvious. It's all over the Bible. Transform your mind, new creation, all this stuff. He does not want us to be the way that we were before we knew Christ. The hard part is simply remembering how present God is, how often he is available, always. We just have to learn to see him, even when we don't want to see him. We have to. Thank you, guys. Let's pray. Father, we love you so much. We thank you for who you are. We thank you for everything that you've done for us. We thank you for being so good and so loving to us. I pray that as we go out of this place this week and as we spend time, going about our daily lives, going back to work, doing the things that we do, I pray that your goodness is never far from our minds, and I pray that we stay actively searching for what you are doing in our lives. I pray that we never forget how active you are. I pray that you would stay present in our minds and that you would stay powerfully active in our lives, always showing us the good, always building our character. In your name I pray it. Amen. Will you guys stand with us? He whispers in my ear, tells me that I'm fearless. He shares a melody, tells me to repeat it. And it makes me whole. It reminds my soul I am all He says I am all He says I am all He says I am, and He says I am His own. You guys have a great week. God bless you.